I'm going to get things going here. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to, I think this is about our sixth iteration of the expert series for the Rhode Island Commercial and Appraisal Board. I don't want to be remiss, and I do want to also remind you guys to thank our sponsors, All Dry, Vantage Builders, Navigant Credit Union, and Spadone Law. So if you have a reason to use any of their particular strains of professionalism, please make sure you do and tell them that you're with the Rhode Island Commercial Appraisal Board. I'm sure they will appreciate it. Well, tonight we've got a great program, or a great series to present for you tonight. This is going to be doing with the environmental concerns, and we're going to start out. I just want to introduce who our two panelists are going to be tonight. First, we have Rick Mandile, who has performed thousands of environmental assessments on all types of real estate on behalf of sellers, buyers, lenders throughout all of New England and the East Coast. He holds an impressive 33 years of career experience and success as an environmental professional, and has captained the largest Rhode Island headquartered environmental firm since 1995, Sage Environmental, which was awarded the silver medal in 2020 by Environmental Business Journal for Small Environmental Business of the Year. Rick is also past chairman of the Environmental Business Council and a member of the Rhode Island Society of Environmental Professionals, the American Council of Engineering Companies, Rhode Island chapter and subcommittee member of the Environmental Committee, the Licensed Site Professionals Association of Massachusetts, and the New Jersey Licensed Remediation Professionals Association. Also alongside of him tonight will be presenting Mike Donegan, who will be overseeing, or actually Mike oversees the firm's environmental practice group. With over 30 years of experience in the area of environmental law, he is the author and editor of the Rhode Island Environmental Law Handbook and is recognized by Martindale Hubbell as a preeminent attorney in his field. Mike's practice includes advising clients on all matters of federal and state environmental permitting, compliance, and remediation matters, including those related to corporate transactions, real estate, and renewable energy products. He has extensive experience in all areas of environmental law, including federal, state, and local permitting associated with major commercial, industrial, and manufacturers' facilities, site remediation associated with soil, groundwater, and natural resources, federal and state brownfield site remediation or redevelopment, matters involving hazardous and solid waste management, disposal, and water and air discharge. Also, land use planning and development. I asked him for one sentence, and that's why it kind of keeps going, like an attorney should do. Freshwater and coastal wetlands permitting and development of energy products, specifically including those before the Energy Facilities Sitting Board, and matters involving regulatory compliance enforcements. Gentlemen, welcome to the expert series, and I hand it off to you at this point.
Thank you, Mike. Steve. So I want to ask some questions of the audience. We've got almost 20 folks have signed up, and it looks like we've got a similar amount online. And feel free to unmute yourself. Want to know, has anybody on this participated in this seminar previously? Yes or no?
No.
No? No. Okay. If we could, it will help Mike and I somewhat tailor our presentation, which presentation should take roughly 30 minutes. And then we want to open it up for questions, because that's really where we think you guys get the most bang for your buck on this. But quickly, just want to understand, if each of you could just quickly say your name and what you do so that we understand our audience, right? Lender, realtor, appraiser, developer. Maria, why don't we start with you?
Hi, Maria Rico, and I am a commercial real estate agent. Have been doing it for about 10 years now.
Okay, thank you. Mike McSweeney.
I'm a residential strictly residential appraiser, and I'm just tuning in to hopefully gain some knowledge.
Great. Paul President Harrison.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also a commercial and slash residential realtor. I've had a class at RIA with you, and also I've been on this before, but I always find it very interesting.
Great. Wilfredo.
I think he was on his
There you go.
phone.
There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. It's a commercial real estate, and I'm trying to concentrate on developments and land, on redevelopments, which is right up your routes.
Mhm.
How about Scott Shepard? Muted. You're muted, Scott.
All right, my unmute button wasn't working. I'm a commercial real estate lender at Centerville Bank.
Perfect. Do a lot of work with you guys.
Yep.
Barry Lofson.
I am a commercial and residential realtor with Berkshire Hathaway.
Gotcha. Jack, we already know what trouble you get into. How about Cliff Melman?
Hi, I'm a commercial real estate broker, and my history goes back with owning and operating industrial facilities, including electroplating and whatnot, back prior to being a CRE broker.
Gotcha. That's a good experience if you have it, right?
It is.
Stacia.
Hi, yeah, I'm a commercial real estate agent for about 13 years.
Great. Brian McMahon.
Hey, Rick. We've worked together in the past, as you know. I'm over at Greenwood Credit Union Commercial Lending.
Sure. Great. And I think I've hit Maria, right? Rico, maybe Mark Wolf. Mark, you're muted. If he's there. Maybe he's not there.
We got Candace too, Rick.
Okay.
Hey, yep. I'm Candace, and I work for Coldwell Banker, and I work both commercial and real estate.
Great. Excellent. Have I missed anybody? No? Paul? Steve? Steve?
You got me. I am right now the sitting governor for the state of Rhode Island. And then during the daytime, I am a resi-mercial agent dealing with residential and commercial property sales.
Okay. Oh, this is going to be fun. Okay. So we've got about 24 slides. You'll see Mike and I will sort of ping pong back and forth between them. I have slides, Mike has slides. We're going to try to go through these as quickly as we can. And then again, at the end of this, we'll open it up to questions. Obviously, anything that gets said here stays here. And I'm told that this recording will self-destruct after 30 minutes if you don't accept this challenge. So with that, moving on, Steve, how do I advance the slides? Do I do that or do you?
I believe Jack has got control of the slides.
Jack. Okay. Let's start here. I'm going to pass the torch over to Mike for the next few slides.
Okay. All right. I can't really see that one fully, Rick. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So when we think of environmental, so I'm an environmental lawyer, and I apologize for Steve's long sentence that he had to read. I think that must have been culled by our people from our webpage advertising everything. So I apologize for that. But what we're really trying to do today is to talk to commercial brokers, because they have all the commercial requirements, all the lenders' requirements, and our business deals, as opposed to residential transactions typically. So when you're representing a buyer or a seller, or you're the lender, or you're a developer, you're always going to run into the issue of a requirement that a phase 1, phase 2 be done. We'll talk about those. what they encompass, site remediation regulations here, leaking underground storage tanks, tank registrations, emergency response, OPC regulations. So there's a whole basket of those things that are examined. But our goal is to try to put you in a position where you can flag the deals with the hair on them, and you have a path to navigate through them. We want you to be the brokers who close the deals that are challenging, right? Where everybody else walks away, they fail 3 times, but you have a path forward. Same thing with the lenders. You have to deal with underwriters, and if you're reselling them on the secondary market, we can help package those. We want to figure out, talk about how to do that. If you're representing buyers or tenants coming in, they have joint and several liability often, so we want to talk about how you protect them, and where they would walk away, how you can present them with a path forward, which gets the deal done, which is what everybody on this call wants to, on this little presentation, want to do. So those are some of the programs we're going to talk about. Could you advance a slide, Jack? All right. So who has liability? In order to understand how you'd allocate liability in a transaction, you have to understand who has it, right? And we often find that people, lay people anyway, think that if I didn't do it, I'm not responsible, right? So that's not the case. Under Rhode Island law, the liability scheme is joint and several, which means the government can hold any owner, current owner of the property, any past owner of the property who contaminated the property, anyone who never owned the property who contaminated it, and then something you may not focus on, current tenants are also equally liable with the landlord for remedial obligations. So past tenants, to the extent that they are a responsible party and did it. Who else could have liability for contamination on the property you're trying to sell, buy, or lend on? Abutters, right? If they have a groundwater plume entering your property, okay, they could have liability. So what do we do in a circumstance? I think the easiest way to talk about this is in terms of we can pick a seller side to discuss a transaction or the buyer side. The lender is going to be involved either way. Anybody have a preference whether we talk about being a broker on the sales side versus the buy side?
Why don't we try the buy side, Mike?
Okay. All right. So buyer side. So some former commercial property is whether it was, one of our mill buildings from the dawn of time, or whether it's something recently constructed that was operated for a business manufacturing concern. So it's up for sale and we're going to go buy it. We represent somebody who wants to buy it. Initially, it's all haggling about price when you haven't yet looked behind the curtain, right, to see what the liabilities might be, right? You haven't done your due diligence yet. So you get a letter of intent, you get a purchase agreement, and it's often kind of soft, right? You kind of agree on a price, assuming everything's acceptable to the buyer. So you haven't really cut a deal yet until you know what those things are, what the liabilities are. Here, let's talk about it. If you buy it, even if you didn't do it, if your client buys it, then they own the property, and they may have lawsuits against others, as we talked about, other responsible parties, but that's not what they're looking for. But they have liability in the first instance. For the lenders on the call, Rhode Island is a really great lending state because under our Industrial Property and Remediation and Reuse Act, lenders have no liability even if they foreclose and own the property. So they become an owner, but they have no liability provided that they're holding the real estate for purposes of protecting their security interest, meaning they're going to hold it to resell it, right? They're not just putting it in a portfolio and having it earn, appreciate and earn income. So so that's a great thing to understand as a lender. If you're a buyer and even in a contract, your seller assumes liability, if you take the property and you operate a similar business, let's say you're buying the assets and you're going to operate a similar business. Remember, there's a legal theory out there called continuing enterprise. If the world believes you're the same company, just because we changed, it was an asset sale and not a stock sale, doesn't mean you don't have liability for the debts and other obligations of the seller. So you want to be aware of that. Rick and I worked on a project where somebody sold his business and the new venture firm came in. They hired him to kind of be on the board and be a president for a little while. And he sat there for 3 months and wrote a whole web page about how this company, which is newly formed, right, really is the continuation of what the grandparents started. It went through all the history. If you want to have Exhibit 1 in the complaint as to why your current company owes all the debts of the prior entity for environmental issues and others, that's Exhibit A, right? It just is. So you want to make sure that the documents are right. They give some thought to not continuing the enterprise. The DEM has primary enforcement for almost all the deals you're going to do. Very rarely the EPA. They could kick it there. There may be intramural liabilities among private parties, contract. There could be statutory liabilities or common law liabilities. I think you're all familiar with negotiating these indemnities. And we'll get to it a little later about what you have to disclose and what you should disclose, even though you don't want to disclose it. Let's go to the next slide. So for the realtors, right? And this now unfortunately flips us to the seller side. But as a buyer, you want to know what the buyer's broker, what do they have to tell us? Can they just say as is, where is, and giggle and rub their hands together as you naively agree to buy it? No. But how does that work legally? So what is the duty to disclose? Typically, you want your lawyers, hopefully aren't just real estate lawyers, right? They practice with enough sophistication that they're actually building in duties to disclose, right? You have a representation. You have provided us with all information, environmental reports, data, documents, okay, related in any way to, and then you list a long string of environmental statutes and regulations, and you want things like the building, is it asbestos, lead, formaldehyde, PCBs in the mastic and the window, like you want that to be broad, but you want to put a contractual obligation on them to give that to you as a buyer. If they don't, then they breach the agreement for which there's an indemnity provision, right? Is there another duty to disclose? Yes. Under Rhode Island law, civil fraud has to rise to the level of near criminality. But if the seller is aware of a material fact and doesn't disclose it and just says as is, where is, I'm just not telling you, okay, you have a claim, a cause of action for civil fraud should you later find out that they've been sitting on 12 pieces of mail from the EPA indicating that your site is a Superfund site. So that's why if a well-advised seller would provide that information, because otherwise you're going to litigate anyway. Why not give it to them and build it into the deal now? So when you hope when you're buying that your seller has already recognized that in a commercial transaction, you're going to do site assessments and all of that work and due diligence. So you hope that they got their house in order before they took it to market. But if you don't, you're in actually a much better position to score financially. Environmental issue in buying and selling real estate, as you know, it's a wildly imperfect market. You have a motivated seller, a motivated buyer. You have a strategic buyer who will pay more. You have an abutter, right? Who's strategic. They want it. So it's hard to value it exactly. Market conditions, different people see a better use for the property. So it's imperfect, but nowhere else is that evidenced in greater detail than in two parties trying to evaluate an environmental liability, right? It's a matter of opinion, and it's a matter of who can see the future best. So when Rick gives you an opinion as to what he thinks, and when I work with Rick all the time, when we give you an opinion that says, we think that legally You could be required, if you want to clean up the property till it's unfettered, to spend $5 million. But we think we can get it through the DEM based upon our prior experience, taking a different tack, doing it this way with a remedial, we think we can do it and spend nothing or spend very little. And we recently represented a buyer who bought a large mill facility that was I guess it used to be a large, Rick, I don't think I'll say, it was a store that was a big chain in New England. And he had it under contract for several million. In the end, we got it, they paid us money, million change, to take the property and the liability. And their assessment was it was going to cost millions to remediate. Our assessment was it was going to cost very little. And so later on sold off a parcel or had it under contract for several $1 million. And so without any work being done, like it was a home run. And it really illustrates large firm on the other side, but there is a real difference and an experience gap in this small market. There's only 3 or 4 lawyers and maybe 3 or 4 consulting firms that you'd want to use. And even if these firms are big, it doesn't mean those people have that kind of inventory and portfolio. And so from the buyer side, you should each have your teams together, that you have confidence in that can do that and give you a much better chance to score on the buy and actually close a deal that may not be financeable when you first look at it. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'll just intro this and then give it to Rick. So for our lenders on the call, when you're doing a commercial loan, what ends up happening is we now have it standardized where all lenders require that a phase 1, the scope of it be consistent with this ASTM standard. It's no longer whatever your consultant, in their own opinion, thinks is an adequate assessment. It's now pretty standardized for the phase 1, and then the phase 2 is more experience related, but I'll let Rick talk about that.
So to Mike's point, on the previous slide, it said, get your house in order. And what we mean by that, if you're a seller, we always want you, before you go to market, have your seller get a phase 1 done, just like you would if you were going to sell your house, right? Get your home inspection done so that a prospective buyer doesn't come in, gets their own phase 1, and then attempts to use that phase 1 to chisel you on the deal. So we're always going to recommend getting your phase 1, phase 2, if necessary, done. Get all those questions answered before your seller goes to market. The screen in front of us, right, talks about phase 1 environmental assessments, transaction screens, phase 2s. I think it's fair to say that everybody on this call understands what these things are, right? At the end of the day, a phase 1 environmental site assessment is attempting to tell the story, the environmental history and use of a property, and whether or not there are any significant environmental issues that would need to be addressed. We would typically address those issues with the performance of a phase 2, where we might actually do soil and groundwater testing. There might be an underground storage tank that needs to move, that type of stuff. So again, if we tell you nothing here, make sure your sellers have got their environmental house in order before they go to market. Next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on these things, but if you're familiar with the whole phase 1 ASTM and transaction due diligence process, there are recognized environmental conditions, potential environmental concerns, historic wreck conditions, controlled wrecks. Think of a wreck as a release or a threat of a release of oil or hazardous materials to a property, whether it be from an on-site source or an off-site source. Not going to get into those. I think everybody here understands those. We can talk more later if you're interested. Emerging contaminants of concern. Not sure if you folks have heard of the term PFOS or PFOS. It's the first contaminant that's being regulated at the part per trillion level. Mike and I have been dealing with these contaminants now for a handful of years. The DEM issued groundwater standards a couple of years back now, and surface water standards. They don't yet have soil standards, but we expect those to be coming down the pike in the not too distant future. Just to give you a little interesting factoid about PFAS, DEM did its own study in attempting to establish groundwater and surface water standards. So they came up with a groundwater standard for GA areas. We have two areas in Rhode Island, GA, GB, GA meaning the expectation is you can drink the water without treatment, GB, you can't drink the water without treatment. So they established for GA areas a standard of 20 ppt. Well, interesting enough, DEM studied rainfall around the state, and they determined that on average, somewhere between 10 and 13 ppt falls out of the sky on us as rain. Good day today. If you go out and collect a sample of rainwater, you're going to probably find close to half of the groundwater standard falling out of the sky. Surface water standard here in Rhode, the DEM established at 70 ppt. That's a relatively high number. We've looked at a number of sites now that have PFAS in groundwater right adjacent to rivers, and we have yet to see anything approach that number in surface water. I am aware, though, of a surface water body here in the state on the Patuxent River. I'm sorry, on the Pawcatuck River down in South County. That supposedly has PFAS numbers over 100 ppt, and I'm told that is likely the result of the Bradford Dye facility, which is said to be a soon-to-be Superfund site, according to DEM Director Terry Gray, in the not-too-distant future. Next slide, please. This is the DEM process, the site remediation regulatory process. It's a linear process, and for those of you who've never been through it, along the left-hand side of the column here, these are the documents that are required to be produced, or public notice inflection points through the process. Essentially, we start with a phase 1, phase 2, call that the site investigation. And at the end of the process, after you clean the site up or cap the site, as is allowed by DEM in certain instances, we come out of this regulatory process with what's known as a letter of compliance, or an LOC. Think of that as a no further action finding from DEM. But this is the process we go through, and it's an iterative process back and forth between consultant, environmental lawyer, and DEM. Next slide. Mike talked earlier about reporting obligations. Mike, why don't you talk a little bit here about owner operator and what?
Right. So what happens when your client has a site assessment that indicates that they have contamination on site, even though it's commercial, above a residential standard? We call their RDECs, residential direct exposure criteria. You run the soil samples and groundwater samples. Your soil samples then are they're tested for the regulated contaminants, and if they're above residential numbers, which are on a table, then your client has a reporting obligation, mechanical. Now, who is that? It's owners and operators have that. Brokers do not. Lenders do not. Lawyers do not. The only obligation to report is a responsible party, which is defined in the statute. Think owners, operators, meaning tenants, okay? And responsible parties are otherwise those people who may have caused the release. So if they were to come into that information. So For leaking underground storage tanks, it's a little different. It's any person having knowledge. So, that's brokers, that's lawyers, that's consultants, that's everybody. And you know who's done that? No one ever in the history of the world who isn't the owner or operator. So I've never had the DEM violate anyone or seek a prosecution for any failure to report. Rick and I are often involved where our site assessments are done and the client sits on them for 10 years. Then you go with the same information, even if you provided the report from 10 years ago, the DEM says thank you, and you go forward to remediate it. That's really the practical side of it. But importantly, you, the brokers, have no reporting obligation to the government, no matter what you know. We'll talk about whether you have an obligation to disclose when you're on the owner sell side. A little bit further on.
Next slide, Jack.
Okay, so what happens, and Steve, we're on the buy side here. What happens when you're trying to buy property that's contaminated, right? Oftentimes it's in a posture where there's evidence of contamination. It's been studied, or you do study during the due diligence, and you have to report. If you were to become the owner, you would have to report. If you were to become the tenant, you would have to report. And so what do? That's when you caucus with your environmental lawyer and your environmental consultant, and you look at what could this cost? What are the possible futures? And if we're really good, we give you an accurate number, an accurate timeline that gets you home. And we start negotiating with the seller. Sellers and buyers start negotiating. But what can you do if you're on, the buy side and you're looking to buy into or lease a commercial property that you at some point learn has contamination that would require to be reported? So Rhode Island, under the Industrial Property Remediation and Reuse Act, has two versions of a get out of jail free card. So the one is if you're buying, you can get a remedial agreement, is what it was. Those used to be called settlement agreements. You may hear them kind of colloquially referred to as brownfields agreements. What that means is, let's say that you've fully vetted the property and the buyer's coming in to buy, and the owner agrees to handle the remedial cost afterwards. They just think they don't want to escrow money, or they do, and they want to manage the cost. And you say, fine. As long as the seller or the buyer, if you got enough of a discount and you're willing to handle the cost, okay, you agree to do the remediation, but you sign this contract with the DEM. In the contract, you're saying, I agree to implement the remedial action work plan and to address the contaminants that have been identified in Exhibit A. If I do that, then I have no other liability for the property. So that's my get out of jail free card. And if the seller is obligated to do it, and we negotiate them putting escrowed funds to cover it, now we have that agreement, which you can give to your lender. Even though they have no liability, isn't it nice if they have to foreclose, not only do they have no liability, but they have a contract with the state that says they can't sue them for anything other than what's been identified, all of which is covered in escrowed funds. So those are a way forward for you and your buyer to get protection. And if you're a seller, you can offer that to your buyer. Go get that, right? Then you're protected and it's easier to finance. If there's already been a remediation done and there's a remedial agreement in place, you can amend those to add your buyer to them. So now they have the get out of jail free card. When keeping in mind something that's not intuitive, which is that when you represent a commercial tenant going into a building, they have the same liability as the owner for contamination ground down. So the law allows for, you can get a brownfields agreement as a tenant. So that is something you should always consider doing when entering a commercial facility. And it's certainly, if you have lenders who require due diligence, which should be all of them, and they have any challenges to get this through underwriting, showing them such an agreement is helpful. And so that's something you should consider. It doesn't need to consume the transaction or delay them, because what you do is once you agree on the business terms, all that happens is you have Rick Mandile send in a 2-page request for a bona fide prospective purchaser certificate or a bona fide tenant certificate. It merely says, hi, I'm a new buyer. I didn't cause the contamination, and I am not, this entity never owned more than X% of a property that was responsible for the contamination, which is almost everybody. So you send that in, they send you a certificate. We have turned those around in 2 weeks, Rick, right?
Yep.
In 2 weeks. And so then you can close, and then you're still eligible for those agreements post-closing, even though you're an owner operator, and that category of person is typically excluded from the benefits of those agreements. So by a simple 2-page application, you get the certificate, it holds your place and ability to get an agreement like that for the tenant or the buyer, all of which benefits the seller because they want it to be financeable so it can close. Next slide.
Next.
So this is something that you may have encountered or may not have encountered, which is when representing sellers or buyers and we want to do a site investigation, the owner really wants to know what the problem is, what the problems are, what they could cost, without obligating them to go to the government, to the DEM with the results. They don't want the buyer to do the tests and then take those results to the DEM and then back out and leave the seller holding the cost obligation to remediate now while they don't have a live buyer. So one way that we do that, manage that issue, is to have, let's take a seller with Rick and I represent. What would happen is the seller might be dealing with Rick initially and have his own corporate or real estate attorney. And then oftentimes Rick will say, well, why you should have the attorney engage me. And that often leads to, well, what does that look like? How do you do it? So then I might get involved for limited purposes. And when the lawyer engages the environmental consultant, right? It goes typically like this when it's me and Rick. It doesn't work that way with other firms, but with me and Rick, it goes where I will engage Rick. The contract says that you're going to investigate this property consistent with the ASTM requirements, and you are doing so to assist me in rendering legal advice to my client. Now, the claim there is attorney work product, and you're also claiming that it's just attorney-client privileged and therefore not discoverable. The reality of the ethical rule is that any advice I give is protected, but facts are not protected. The example is I walk into your place of business and I see the dead body and I tell you to run or call the police, and I'm later put on the stand and they ask me, what did I say and what did I see? Ethically, I have to say what I saw because that's a fact. The advice I gave, call the police or run, is my legal advice. I don't have to talk about that. The attorney-client privilege and work product shield that we use here, I describe as a wooden shield, not even a bronze shield. But I will say that having been doing this for 40 years, it's never been challenged. I do believe that a court would find it very difficult to want to deprive a client of this kind of information to get legal advice. And I liken it to the IRS comes after you your lawyer hires an accountant to forensically look at this, right? If that work that the accounting firm is doing forensically is not discoverable, and I think of this the same way, and it's never been tested, and I have given this same talk to the Bar Association with judges sitting right next to me, and they've been nodding their heads. Nobody wants to look at that. So this is a very useful tool, and I can even tell you that I don't think others do this, but Rick and I do this, where he can do the soil and groundwater samples and then tell the lab to run the results, but not print lab certs. Call him with the results. Then he calls me, we talk it through, see if our future costs and timeline is still the same. Then I can discuss it with my client. If it's too much and my client, the buyer or the seller, is not interested, then Rick tells them, don't print lab certs. They're never printed. He closes his file without any data in there. And the client's files have no record of that because I engaged them. So that's how we practically manage it, all of which is legal and ethical. And it's a useful tool for buyers and sellers in managing that risk. Next slide. You're going to come into these every day, right? In what you do, sale, lease agreements, and the terms you're going to encounter, right? Disclosures. Those are, as we all know, right? What environmental liabilities, notices, conditions are required in one of these agreements, lease or sales agreement, what's required to be disclosed. Obviously, you want to be pretty precise with that. The reps and warranties as to what they've done and what they know. All of those need to be linked to the default provisions, right? And the indemnity provisions. You may see a lot of as is, where is from sellers. They don't want to have to tell you, and they think this protects them. I don't think it does, and we'll sue you anyway. But I think as is, where is relates to, it really only provides protection to obvious conditions that are discoverable. If you do you can do a building inspection and find out if the roof is good, right? Those kinds of things. But things that are latent, groundwater, soil, if you know something, you should tell it or risk the lawsuit afterwards. Confidentiality provisions, oftentimes the landlord or the owner or the seller, they will let you do your work, but you have to keep it confidential. You can't go to the government because they don't want to be stuck with a cleanup obligation, right? So how do we deal with that? That's a matter of negotiation. Here, yeah, they do not, when a buyer is getting data and they say, even if there is a confidentiality provision, you can't take it to the DEM. So what if they do? What are your damages? It's like an indemnity. I negotiate, I'll have clients who are absolutely apoplectic about the broad indemnity that a buyer wants. And I say, let's play this out. The day you close, all the money goes out of the LLC to the shareholders. And you immediately file to dissolve the company. Who cares what the indemnity says? Right? We don't have to win that one. Let's get a concession on price to give them that broad indemnity. And let's just, we won't be there when that party happens. And that's all legal and ethical because there's no requirement in the sales agreement that we stay in business and open for the next 20 years, unless there is, which is rare. And same thing with confidentiality. Your buyer, your tenant, you can do the site assessment, but you can't go to the DEM with the results. So what if we do? What are your damages? Right? Think about it. In that instance, light has been shown on the environmental conditions that exist. You already have that remedial obligation, right? So I don't think there's a lot there. So when I'm representing a seller, I put a banger in the agreement, right? You owe us $250,000 if you breach it, whatever the number is for the material for the deal. to try to put teeth into it. And we have to be careful that it's more of a liquidated damages provision, not a penalty provision. So that has to be carefully drafted because one is void ab initio and the other is not. And you may find that if you represent a seller, that not only do we not want you to take the results as the buyer's soil and groundwater results to the government, we also don't want you to give them to us because then we have a reporting obligation. So we build that into these agreements. Query again, what if they do, right? We want to have provisions for how all communications go. And, and then you see indemnity provisions that run either way, right? Who is indemnifying whom for what risks that are known and unknown. And remember, when you're representing a buyer, if you have a killer indemnity from an entity that's going to cease to exist shortly after the closing, think about what that's worth. All right, next slide. All right, so this is, I think, goes more to cost of how you as a buyer or a seller or a tenant would evaluate remedial obligations and where the real money is in this business. The imperfect world of the advice buyers and sellers are getting creates a great opportunity financially if you're the one who's more well advised. And these are Rick, why don't you talk more about how these factors help determine how you see the future? I think you're on mute, Rick. Nope, mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as you'll see in a subsequent slide here, DEM, and this is, a lot of folks don't quite understand this, our regulations allow a lot of contamination to remain beneath properties. So long as that contamination isn't migrating off-site and it can be managed on-site, the far and away the most often used remedy in Rhode Island is capping. What's capping? Capping is parking lots, it's building footprints, it's landscaped areas. So a lot of folks think, oh, I've got a very expensive cleanup here. Well, oftentimes your remedial strategy is using what you already have on a property for caps. And the idea behind a cap is that you're creating an impervious surface that's limiting or minimizing stormwater infiltrating through soil and or groundwater that might otherwise move or mobilize those contaminants out of solution, put them in groundwater, and cause them to leave the property. So we're allowed to leave because we understand now a lot more than we did 30 years ago, the true impacts or lack thereof of certain types of contaminants. And as part of that capping strategy, and again, I know a lot of the lenders here, we've dealt with this and lenders have lent on these types of properties. A capped property that has what's known as an environmental land use restriction or an ELUR that's linked to the deed that says, yep, there's contamination here that the DEM has allowed to remain in place beneath a cap so long as those caps are maintained and a report, an annual cap inspection report is sent to DEM saying, yep, cap's still in good condition and it's still serving the purpose and the property is still in compliance. Last count, I think we're well over 1,000 properties here in Rhode Island that have gone through the capping remedial procedure with DEM, and lenders lend on them all the time. I believe, and I think Mike would feel the same, if you've got a property that's been capped and has an ELUR, there really are no longer any environmental liabilities. And that property, in my view and in my experience, that's a value add to a property. There's no longer a question mark environmentally on a property that's gone through that whole DEM investigation, remediation and capping process at that point.
Yeah, I would say, Rick, I would agree with that, remember, you're not going to have an ELUR recorded unless you already have a letter of compliance. That's part of that. So you will have closure on this, which helps lenders, it helps a seller not get, kind of gouged by the buyer, and it helps the buyer know that they don't have to reopen this. A couple of things I think about, which is beyond capping as a means of avoiding off-site migration, as Rick described, also the risk on site to your employees, to your people, right, to the contamination. The risk is through dermal contact, inhalation, and ingestion. So if we're all just soil exposed, you could touch the soil, you could breathe it, you could eat it, that kind of thing. And so by capping it, you've eliminated the exposure pathway, and therefore you have eliminated the risk. And this is all risk-based. And so that's part of it. But yeah, when you encounter a property that has a lot of history and it has a letter of compliance and an ELUR recorded, you shouldn't look at it like you're going to spend more money, except in the circumstance where you're going to do some kind of a new build. When you're going to excavate, then it's just really, Rick will talk later about hazardous building materials, cost for disposal. And if even though we can leave this contaminated soil there, if we excavate it and then take it off site because you have a cut development, then there'll be a cost associated with disposing of that soil. And as you go in on the buy side, that's something that, you will, Rick will give you a number so you know what that number is and you can negotiate it. You can also, when you're on the buy side, catastrophize it because the cost could range from this to this. And that's why we need a discount of $2 million. It's a whole, again, experience and examples will really help you close your deal from the buyer or seller side and put these variables, shape them the way that works best for your client and gets the deal closed. Can't hear you, Rick.
Another thing to keep in mind is that if you've got a buyer who's acquiring a site that has an ELUR, has gone through the capping process, the regs require that DEM be notified of the new buyer within 15 days of the transaction. Don't get hung up on the 15 days. Typically, if you let DEM know within a couple of months, you're fine. DEM will respond to that notification with a letter to the new owner saying, hey, thanks for letting us know. Just be advised that you have this annual cap inspection requirement. And that's it.
Yeah, well, we're getting
slide,
kind of on the weeds on that one, but as long as we're there, I think what Rick is suggesting is that when you buy a property, your client does, or lend on it, that has an ELUR and a letter of compliance, you can step into the shoes protected by that. Those are done with finality, provided that you tell them and you agree to be bound by the conditions, which you should want to do. So that's just your lawyer on the buy side has to be aware that this notice is required, especially if there's a remedial agreement. You can succeed to all the benefits, covenant, which we'll talk about later, covenant not to sue and contribution protection. But you have to notify them and agree that you'll be bound by the conditions for those benefits to apply.
Let's go to the next slide. I know we're a little tight on time here, so I might move through some things. These are just stats. I talked about capping sites. As you see, top line, they're far and away the most often used remedial strategy in DEM. Next slide. These are quick 3 examples of sort of easy capping site, sort of middling site with some issues, and the site to the right is sort of the most challenging. First site on your left, your typical industrial property. It has what we would refer to as urban fill type contaminants that are the result of combustion byproducts or asphalt. Basically, it's a soil only contamination site. And that image describes 3 caps. The green are landscape caps, the gray is pavement, and the white is the building slab. That's pretty vanilla. That's a probably the most common capping style site that we see. The site in the middle.
Oh, Rick, could I just jump into one thing that they may not know is that, so when you cap a site, it doesn't have to be pavement. So we have a risk assessment only assumes that you will have dermal contact, inhalation, and ingestion risk in the top 2 feet of soil. So if you have it in the top 2 feet, you can either pave over it with a restriction, right, that limits contact, but you can also put 2 feet of fill and landscaping and geomembranes and other things. So it doesn't have to just be pavement. So when you're doing a development, Rick builds in all the landscaping features and all the rest of it so that it costs you less, right? You're not paying for anything you weren't going to do anyway.
Right, right. So the middle site here is a little more complex in that there's contamination beneath this building slab, such that it has the potential for those contaminant vapors, and in this case it was a dry cleaner. Those vapors could potentially get into the building, into the interior space. The remedial solution there, if anybody on this call is familiar with a radon system, it's the same idea. Basically putting some type of a negative pressure or a vacuum beneath the slab to safely vent those contaminants before they have an opportunity to get into the interior indoor airspace on a building. We do a lot of those, especially here in the most developed state in the country, Rhode Island. We see a lot of these. Go ahead, Mike.
I would just venture to say that if you're on there is no more sensitive issue between buyers and sellers or tenants than the request to sample indoor air. Because if you have an indoor air issue, it could be coming from a manufacturing operation inside, building materials, other things, but you're going to go on a scavenger hunt to find the source. And if it turns out what you're trying to do is eliminate any exposure pathway from groundwater beneath the building where the contaminants volatilize into through the slab into the building. And if you do, you've got issues. And so buyers, tenants should always want to do that. And the landlords and sellers never want to do it. And that's a very sensitive negotiation as to how you do it. And it implicates all the things we talked about. If you're going to do it, if you need to do it to get financing, the lender won't give it to you without it, or the buyer won't buy without it. How can you make a seller comfortable that they won't end up holding the bag on this? And those are some of the issues we talked about previously.
The site number 3 there, fortunately we don't have all that many sites like these, but they're there and we still find them to this day. This is a site where we've got groundwater contamination from an offsite source that's impacting a down gradient property. That groundwater contamination is finding its way into a subsurface stormwater system that is collecting and diverting that contaminated groundwater into a river at levels that exceed DEM surface water standards. That ultimately will become a multi-million-dollar groundwater cleanup. Again, thankfully, we don't have a whole lot of those, but they're there, and we continue to surface those on a pretty regular basis. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to. The next 3 slides relate to property condition assessments or PCAs. All of what Mike and I have been talking about relate to ground down soil, groundwater, subslab soil gas issues. Oftentimes, as part of environmental due diligence, we are also being asked to evaluate ground up or in-building environmental conditions. And these are the things that you guys would typically find or come to expect, such as asbestos, mold, PCBs in building materials, lead in building materials, and we're actually seeing PFAS in certain building materials as well. I'm going to skip through these slides because we're running short on time. But just know that there's also a ground up or in building environmental risk profile that we are oftentimes evaluating.
Which, by the way, comes into play much more when your client intends to renovate a building.
Right.
Like we had the Citizens Bank building downtown when that was being flipped. What was it? Something like $5 million to dispose, or some millions to get rid of the windows.
Right.
Because they had PCBs and the mastic around them. That killed the deal.
Yep. Next slide. We'll skip through this. Go to the next one, Jack. Skip through this. Next one. All right. So Mike and I we're oftentimes people will say to us, "Oh, DEM, they're tough. They're not great to work with." Our experience in working with other New England states says otherwise. We have found over the decades of working with our friends at DEM, they are very accommodating. It's not a privatized system. Mike and I have pretty much all the players at DEM on speed dial on our cell phones. Any given day, Mike or I can call Terry Gray, the director, or Susan Forcier, the assistant director, or any of their project leaders, and we can get them on the phone and get a response. So when you hear folks whine or complain about DEM, I'd say, hey, compared to who and compared to what? Because we oftentimes can get very quick responses. Mike and I are oftentimes asked to speak on behalf of the governor and DEM when it comes funding time. So again, I just want to kind of push back at that sentiment. Mike, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
Yeah, it's also very different than some might imagine. So, for instance, the way regulations happen. So, I'm on the board of the Society of the Rhode Island Society of Environmental Professionals, and Rick's a member of that too. He was the president, right? The Environmental Business Council. We actually work with the government as regulations are being developed. We're like a peer group. The DEM sits on the board as well. And so we tell them things that we'd like them to take action on or clarify or whatever. It's that kind of a relationship. And look, Rick and I just closed a deal where the DEM agreed to give us letters of compliance as we built out each one of the buildings that's going to have apartments in it and condos. Whereas historically, that only happened on the whole site once the last one was completed. But as you build in phases and lenders lend in phases, they want certainty that at least that building I'm lending on is good. And now we move on. So they did that. We had done that when we did the Kettle Point development. They were very flexible to make it work financially. I'm working on the South Key, the development of the port in East Providence. That again took a wildly different departure from what was contemplated by the regs in order to make, a large infrastructure project happen. I represent URI and the airport. We find them really great to work with. It doesn't mean they agree every time,
right,
but at least it's nothing other than a disagreement over the law, and at least it's clear and we know what we're going to do about it. So I think that's great. Rhode Island has faced an interesting thing in the environmental space in that Peter Nerona, the AG, has taken a very different view of his role. He has a statute that gives him the ability to enforce all of DEM's programs criminally. So he has now brought that in a way no one else ever had for things that you wouldn't typically think of in any way as criminal. And so while this won't affect your purchase of real estate, when your clients who manufacture things or otherwise have engaged with the Attorney General's office, it's new. This is in the last 3 years, really. And I have, 2 matters that are highly publicized in the front page of the Journal and the news where he was involved. And so it's very different because you have a bunch of attorneys general lawyers who've never worked with these programs trying to enforce them. And the DEM and the Attorney General have very different ideas about what they mean. So you likely won't encounter that, but that's some context here in Rhode Island.
Next slide, please.
All right,
So, Mike, why
quickly.
don't you handle
So,
this one?
yeah, so what happens when a broker has knowledge, right? What do you have to disclose? This gets a little complicated, right? If the knowledge is public information, then you don't have to disclose it because that's readily available to everyone else. What about things a broker should know, but they didn't do the work to know it? Well, that's kind of interesting. Is there a duty of inquiry? Is the notice a title issue? Is it only information your client told you? So that's a little more sensitive, as is the issue of, can your knowledge be imputed to a seller or a landlord? So, what do you do if you have information, some prior client came in and did an assessment and gathered information? Could we go back to the last slide, Jack? Oh, thanks. Actually, the one before that, I think we skipped two. There we go. So, when is your knowledge imputed to the seller? That's more their problem. What I would do as a broker, commercial broker, is I would want to make sure that my agreement that I have with my brokerage firm, my employer, right, covers what I'm required to disclose. It addresses this in some way. And it addresses it in a way that lines up with our insurance coverage. So I want to know what I don't want every broker making up their own idea of what they have to disclose. It should be a firm position backed by your insurance policy. So as a broker, if you stay within those parameters, you're protected with an insurance coverage, and your liability is limited. So I also think that your firm should also have in place an agreement with you, like guidelines as to what you're supposed to request. What are you supposed to know? In your contract with your client, you want to have protections about disclosure, right? That the duties of disclosure are all theirs, not yours, right? You want to look at what your contractual protections are in your agreement with your client. And you all have lawyers. That's one thing. It's going to be, it doesn't matter until the lawsuit comes, and then you'll be running to that document. Insurance is typically going to cover your negligence, but not knowing and willful violations of the law. And they can even get you a little bit, right, and deny coverage if your firm has a policy and you didn't comply with that. So if somebody wrote one somewhere, or the insurance policy for your brokerage firm has, in Exhibit 146 guidelines that you are required to follow in order to be covered, you want to know what those are to make sure you're doing it to limit your personal liability. That's what I have for this slide. Next slide.
Yeah, other way. There you go.
All right. So this comes to, I have them and you have them and the lenders have them. What are your responsibilities for managing the cowboy client? Thanks for the law, but I'm just doing it. I'm just buying anyway, or I'm just selling it anyway and I'm not telling them, right? They have information that says they have to report, but they're not going to do it. I think our job is to advise them in writing, right? That you as a broker to disclose all material information to your tenant, to the buyer, to the seller, like it disclose. I would advise the cowboy buyer or tenant that even if they intend to go cowboy, it doesn't mean their lender is going to ride along with them, because they're not taking entrepreneurial risk, right? They're a lender. And so you should be aware that let's not waste time by having you agree to something that your lender won't finance. And remember, having a commitment letter from a lender who didn't get it through underwriting yet and who doesn't have the environmental information necessary to actually close this deal is kind of really a soft commitment. So I would want them up front, if they start to go cowboy, yeah, we'll take it, and we're not going to tell the government, or we're not going to do an investigation, advise them that their lender is going to require it anyway. I would advise that the contractual protections between the buyer and the seller may be meaningless if the seller ceases to exist shortly thereafter. Advising your clients on the buy and sell side that engaging the environmental issues with consultants and lawyers earlier in the transaction is a lot better than having normal due diligence take you all the way up until the agreement is about to expire, or your, like-kind exchange deadline is upon you, or you have to close by year end because you're a fund and you have to spend it. Having these things come up that then the environmental people get engaged and we all say, we can manage this. It's just going to take you 9 months. Now the deal craters for that. We want to get those things addressed as early as possible. And I think you can help your clients close deals by doing that. And I think that's clear enough. We don't have much time, so I'll skip the examples of cowboy clients. We all know who they are, and you can ask in our Q&A session. If you want to talk about it, we can. Next slide.
Yeah, I think we go to the end. One more. Okay. How can we help? Let us, what do we have for questions, guys?
I know it's a lot, but if you want to talk about anything on your desk, you can be anonymous. You can talk about it, experiences, what you think we've talked about that would give you an advantage in making a pitch to a potential client. Anything we can do to help answer those questions.
This is Scott Shepard from Centerville Bank. You guys had mentioned we're seeing a lot of like cap in place, and we're financing a lot of projects like that with land use restrictions, cap in place. What I'm finding is that there's not a lot of post-closure due diligence follow-up, right? So these guys are, a lot of our borrowers are getting this stuff done, but the annual reporting that is required, they're really just not doing. Mike, I don't know if you have some experience on what the potential liability is for these borrowers.
Yes. Yep.
Mike, what's a cost-effective way to deal with this? Sometimes I feel like, or, Rick, I'm sorry, there was a cost-effective way, just a sort of a two-part question there.
So what I've done, well, what we do with all of our capping clients is we've got them on a master calendar. And we send out an email 60 days before the annual cap inspection report is due to them to say, hey, property owner, your annual cap inspection report is due in 2 months. Take a look at your surfaces, let us know, and we'll come out and do the annual inspection and reporting. I mean, we've got, last count, I think we've got about 50 sites that we perform those annual cap inspections and reports for. But it's really something that needs to get calendared, and we typically run with that ball for them.
But Scott,
so Mike, if they're just not doing it, what's the liability there?
Yeah, sure. So the liability, if you don't submit it, is going to be penal in nature, like a penalty to your client, but it's low. So it's not typically going to impact their financial strength. But one thing you can consider doing is, in the same way that you require them to have insurance, name you as an additional insured, and have the agreement with the insurer notify you if the payments aren't made, you could require that they have an agreement with Sage to do the annual capping, and that Sage, you sign it, Sage is obligated to notify you if that's ever canceled.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, you can make it a part of your loan docs.
Yep.
That they'd copy the bank on those annual cap inspections, because it is maintaining compliance.
Right. But going back to like how big an issue this is. So let's say it's the parking lot, the easy one, right? And it turns out that Sage has to go out there, run around, photo dock it, and see if there are any cracks in the parking lot, or if it's been removed, right? And it's just exposed dirt. Assuming there are some cracks, they will fill them and then send that report in, right? Assuming it's all fine, they just send in the report. In the end, if it turned out that some pavement had been removed erroneously, creating an exposure risk, you would be maybe a small fine to the borrower, and then they would have to put the pavement back. So this isn't a whale that's going to swallow the client if they're willing to do that. If what they do is they start building in areas that are restricted, they put residential on a restricted site, or they start using the groundwater when they can't. Those things are a little more significant. Yeah.
So what we do is,
Okay.
Scott, to the extent I can, we don't submit those annual cap inspection reports with proverbial holes in the cap. That's why we let them know 60 days ahead of time so that they can get their house in order, get their, whether it be pavement, buttoned up or landscaping, cleaned up. Client today, we did a cap inspection and there's 6 inches of mulch that's part of a cap where we can see the geofabric underneath being exposed because stormwater's been running off. We send them an email, hey, we saw this stuff, here are the pics, please go out and fix that stuff. We'll come back out as soon as you tell us, we'll photo doc it and get your annual reporting. Good question, though.
Thank you.
It's a good question. Other questions? Or war stories to share with us. I mean, Mike and I oftentimes will learn things on these presentations because y'all are in the business.
Question. Okay, I hope I'm not muted. What is easier for you guys to manage an investor that has all the properties all under one LLC or individual LLCs?
Sure. Let me field that. That's a legal question. So, Wilfredo, you never want to have more than one property in one LLC. And the reason is that if you have an LLC that owns a piece of property that you learn later has some surprise contamination, even if it was fine when you bought it, but the next door neighbors had a catastrophic release from a tank farm and now it's all over under your property, you're not going to refinance that. Tenants may not want to go in. There may be a vapor intrusion issue from what's coming up through the slab, and your abutter may go bankrupt. And now what do you have, right? You have a liability. And so we want to strand those in individual LLCs because environmental liabilities, despite people's blood pressure rise and fantasy to the contrary, there's no magic about them. They can't pierce the corporate veil. They're just like any other liability a corporation would have. And if you don't have the money to do the remediation in that entity, you don't. DEM can take whatever action it wants against the entity with now limited assets. You may lose the real value of that asset. That's why you want to strand it there. If you have, bad apple in the same LLC as other good apples, now those good assets they're at risk to fund the remediation on the bad one. So you want to put every single one in a separate LLC. And I can't even tell you how interesting it is when our clients come in. A common Rhode Island real estate owner profile is somebody who had a small business. They own the business in one LLC, and then they own, or a corporation of some sort, then they own the land under it personally. When we sit with the estate planners, we're like, oh God, why did you do, like now all your personal assets are at risk to the extent that there's any contamination. We have a strategy for managing that as best we can, but that's common. Or when you find people who come to me with an environmental problem and they own 12 properties personally, or they're all in the same. So you want to break them up.
Can I go a little further? Trailer parks. Trailer parks. Somebody's buying the whole trailer park.
Yeah. So trailer parks, I have limited exposure in that area, but a trailer park typically is land owned by, the owner of the park, and then you're ground leasing to the trailers. Somebody may own their trailer or they may buy it from you and you finance it, but typically it's the land that is owned. So just a piece of land. And the magic of a trailer park is that it's zoned to allow that use. That's why it's hard to cite new ones, right? So because nobody wants those in their neighborhood. So it ends up it's just land. When you're buying land, you're going to do your site assessment, and you're going to own, it's one piece of land typically, or three that make up the park. And so those likely will be all held in the same entity, right? But if it turns out that you did have a 100-acre trailer park and you had three different parcels, if there's no economy of having them to owned commonly, like no license to operate a trailer park requires a unified owner, then I would split those up too, just in case. But if your license requires that you have one owner, then you're stuck with that one.
Questions?
Anything we can help discuss with you about, have you lost any commissions, like it lost because deals crater? Have you made a pitch to a developer and you lost it because you didn't really understand the strategy, how to convince them that they would be better off using you as a broker because you know how to land properties that have environmental issues, past, present? Because that's happening whether you know it or not. And we have, from these discussions we've done in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, we get calls afterwards from people, and some of you will be making pitches to represent sellers of contaminated property. They haven't been able to sell it forever, or it's an industrial property, or let's say it's a property that has a deed restriction, environmental land use restriction that says you can't do residential, but there's no commercial market, so you want to make it residential. We can do that. The fact that it's restricted and it says no residential doesn't mean no residential. It means no residential unless you come back and talk to us and put the caps back in place after you do your new development. So your seller may not know that. When you make your pitch, the more knowledgeable you are, I think it's far more likely you're going to get that client. And when you're a bank lending, just saying it has to be squeaky clean to close, or we'll have to see what the environmental is very different than saying, we do this all the time. We have professionals we work with, and we're going to have steps that are required to do that protect you in the first instance and us in the second instance, but we're not afraid of that.
Love to hear that.
Another point that's part of all this, Rhode Island has a brownfields grant program that y'all may not be aware of, and it's actually pretty generous. The most recent grant funding awarded, I think it's $2.5 million. On average, there's like 150,000 per 150 to 250,000 per property was recently awarded for environmental assessment and cleanup, mostly cleanup. And there's probably 15 awards that recently went out, and of the 15, I think Sage helped with maybe 6 or 7 of those. As I think we all know, there's been a big focus on housing. So if you were to look at the DEM website and the brownfields grants that were recently funded by DEM, all of them are housing related, whether it be cleaning up a mill property or doing some type of demo and cleanup in conjunction, but all geared towards creating affordable housing. So that round recently came out maybe a month ago. The next round will likely come out probably 6 to 8 months from now. But we, the tax-paying folks here in Rhode Island, we fund that. And I think there's about 3 million left in the pot for future brownfields grant funding. So if anybody has any questions on that, feel free to reach out to me after this call. I can share with you how that works.
And I will say that the last a tool in a toolbox that can be used is environmental insurance.
Hmm.
So for the soccer stadium, right, in Pawtucket, I had the joy of working on that as the AAA PawSox site for years. Unfortunately, didn't happen. But the soccer stadium, right, in order when we acquired the Apex property and other properties to put that whole gateway project together, we were going to get public funding through bonding. And so one of the tools we used to assist in, we didn't want to give a discounted rate, right, when we bring those bonds out. So one of the things we did was we purchased environmental insurance that would cover certain environmental costs up to a limit for a period of time. And environmental insurance isn't like the insurance you buy for your house or your car. They aren't contracts of adhesion. Contracts of adhesion are when you're given a contract, it's take it or leave it. Like we never negotiate our house policy, right? We don't say redline it and send it back to them. But environmental assurance is very different. When you go out to the market, the players change constantly. Every 3 or 4 months, somebody has reached their limit of what they want to do in the marketplace, but others enter. And they change terms. They have different risk pools that they use. So really what happens is I end up negotiating these policies and I write the definitions and I write what's covered. And it's really almost a creative writing exercise that covers as best we can for our target. And so if there's a remedy you have to put in place, and if you want the seller to escrow monies, $600,000 to do X, you also could get a cost cap policy. It says above 600, up to 2 million, this insurance policy covers it, and build that into the deal. If you needed certainty, if your lender needed that. So that's another tool, because everybody on this call, whether you're a developer, a seller broker, buyer broker, a lender, the magic only happens if the closing happens. So that's another tool we can use if everybody's sort of wants yet another layer of security beyond what we've discussed.
And generally speaking, Mike, right, I think it's fair to say that environmental insurance sort of follows a sine wave over the years. And I think recently meaning within the last 3 to 5 years, that environmental risk insurance, that remedial cost cap insurance, it's actually pretty darn affordable compared to what we've seen in the past. Mike, I know you recently secured environmental insurance. I think it was $10 million for 10 years for a remedial cost cap, and it was like 150 grand, a one-time payment.
Yeah, for the decade of insurance. And what was
pretty
significant, what was significant about that is that you'll get coverage cheaper or 3 times as expensive. And then the exclusions will be any filled land and groundwater. Well, almost all of colonial New England in urban centers is filled land, right? And so that doesn't help us with urban fill. And then groundwater, if they exclude those 2 things, what do we have, right? So we ended up negotiating all of those, got groundwater back in, and we ended up writing the definition that we kind of marked it in time. It doesn't cover any contaminants that were in fill at the time the land was filled. So that we're going back, 100 years. So now anything added after that is now covered, whether it was whole or in part. So, but you can, given those examples, it really is a negotiation of what you want, and you can find it. There's 2 or 3 brokers that I use that are really helpful in the ever-changing market. But that's another tool if you have a deal that requires it. And by the way, if you don't need groundwater contamination coverage, and it really is, there's a soils risk only, we capped it, but somebody's just skittish, that'll be really cheap because you can define how much it would cost to take soil away, and that's a risk they can handle.
And I just need to bring this to a conclusion here. I think we had told most of our participants we were going to do an hour, and in hindsight, we should have made this a 2-credit course, because there's certainly a lot more information I think you could continue to share. And we had a lot of people step off here thinking it was only an hour.
Yep.
So I want to
Yep.
say thank you very much for presenting today. And I was happy that we had a couple of lenders on, and you know, their tag-ins were kind of very instrumental to the conversation, not having a lender on the panel here too. So add a little credibility to what was going on there. Again, I want to thank the sponsors, All Dry, Vantage Builders, Navigate Credit Union, Shadone Law. I want to remind those of you who are still on board here that next week's expert series is going to be on RPR. And some dates to remember. Also, next week, October 16th, is going to be our annual meeting. It'll be at Cersei, which is, of course, the old Chapel Hill over in Garden City. And then November 4th will be our commercial day, and that'll be held at Cello's in Warwick. Hope to see you all there. And on behalf of the Rhode Island Association for Commercial and Appraisals, I want to thank you both, gentlemen, Rick and Mike, for sharing with us today. And I really hope to see you back, and I really wish you'd send some information to us, because I think there's a lot of members who are going to hear about this from the people that did hear it tonight and say, what was the guy's name? What was his number? How do we get a hold of him? And I'd like to you put one of your kids' pictures up for your picture, Rick, on the profile there. So that's really nice.
All right. And Steve, by the way, as we've said every year we do this, any members who want to give us a call to chat through an issue they have, we don't have to you don't have to retain us. We're happy to just chat with you and help you through your issues, because we know you have.
And we would be constantly repeating your name weekly on these expert series if you would consider being a sponsor, perhaps, for the Rhode Island Commercial and Appraisal Board. But anyway, thank you again very much for those of you who are still here. Thank you for joining us and staying on board, and have a great week. And we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Yep. Bye, everyone.
Take care.